At some point today, you will probably shake someone's hand, or you will see someone else do it. A greeting, a farewell, a deal being closed, an introduction being made. The gesture is so automatic that you perform it without thinking. Two people extend their right hands, grip, shake twice, release. It takes about 3 seconds. And in those 3 seconds, you are performing a ritual that is at least 2,500 years old, that began not as a greeting, but as a proof of something, that was adopted by merchants because it solved a specific legal problem, that was spread across the world, partly by the religious convictions of a pacifist sect from 17th century England, and that is now so universal it appears in the founding documents of international law. The handshake is not a natural human behavior. No other species does it. Young children do not do it instinctively. They have to be taught. It is a technology invented for a purpose, refined over centuries, and so successfully deployed that it now feels like instinct. So what was it actually for? The oldest images of handshaking we have found come from ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Greece. Stone carvings and painted pottery showing two figures grasping each other's right hands. In these images, the handshake is not a casual greeting. It is a formal moment, the sealing of a treaty, the transfer of power, a covenant between rulers. The gesture had a specific logic. By extending your right hand, your sword hand, your weapon hand, and allowing another person to grip it, you were demonstrating two things simultaneously. First, that you were not holding a weapon. Second, that the other person now had hold of your weapon hand, making it momentarily impossible for you to draw one. The handshake was, at its origin, a mutual display of peaceful intent enforced by the mechanics of the gesture itself. You could not shake hands and reach for a sword at the same time. This is why the right hand, specifically. In a world where almost everyone is right-handed, the right hand is the threat hand. A greeting that immobilizes the threat hand is a greeting that provides a moment of genuine physical security. The ancient handshake survived into the medieval period, but it evolved. The up and down pumping motion that we now consider standard, rather than simply gripping and holding, may have developed partly as a way of dislodging any weapon that might be concealed up a sleeve. If you grip someone's hand and shake it vigorously, anything hidden in their sleeve tends to fall out. The gesture became not just a symbol of peaceful intent, but a practical check, a quick search disguised as a greeting. Whether this origin story is literally true or a later embellishment, it captures something real about the function of the handshake in an era when personal security was a constant concern and trust between strangers was genuinely difficult to establish. For most of European history, greetings between people were not equal. How you greeted someone depended entirely on the relative social status of the two parties. You bowed or curtsied to superiors. You expected bows and curtsies from inferiors. You might embrace an equal. The gestures were elaborate, differentiated, and deeply political, a physical map of the social hierarchy performed in the moment of meeting. The handshake, by contrast, was relatively flat. It was the same gesture regardless of who was doing it. This is why it appealed to the Quakers, the religious society of Friends, a Protestant sect that emerged in 17th century England and became one of the most influential forces in the history of the handshake. The Quakers believed in the fundamental equality of all people before God. They refused to bow, to remove their hats, or to use formal titles, practices they considered expressions of a social hierarchy they rejected. They refused to call anyone sir or my lord. They used thee and thou, the familiar forms of address, with everyone regardless of rank. And they shook hands with everyone equally, as a physical expression of the belief that no person was more deserving of deference than any other. The Quakers were a tiny minority, but they were disproportionately influential in commerce. Quaker merchants developed a reputation for honesty and fair dealing, partly because their religious commitments made deception a matter of conscience, not just reputation. They became trusted partners in trade networks across Britain and the American colonies. And wherever they traded, they shook hands. The handshake, partly through the Quaker network, became associated with honest dealing, with equality of parties, with the kind of trust that made commerce possible between strangers. As trade expanded in the 17th and 18th centuries, merchants faced a persistent problem. How do you make an agreement binding when you have no written contract, no witnesses, no legal mechanism? The handshake became one answer. In the trading culture of early modern Europe, a handshake between merchants was understood to be a binding commitment, not legally enforceable in the same way as a signed document, but socially and reputationally, binding in a way that mattered enormously in communities where reputation was the primary collateral for future business. To shake on a deal and then break it was not just a legal matter. It was a profound social violation that could destroy a merchant's ability to do business in an entire network. The handshake was a public declaration, witnessed by whoever was present, that you were staking your reputation on your word. This gave the handshake something that written contracts of the era often lacked: immediacy, publicity, and social enforceability. You could dispute the meaning of a written clause. It was much harder to dispute that you had shaken on something in front of witnesses. By the 19th century, the handshake had migrated from commerce to politics to diplomacy to everyday social life. It appeared in descriptions of political negotiations, in accounts of business dealings, in advice manuals on polite behavior. The particular form it took, right hand, firm grip, 2 or 3 shakes, direct eye contact, became codified as a norm. Books were written about how to shake hands properly. A limp handshake became a social liability. A firm one became a signal of confidence and trustworthiness. The handshake also became embedded in international diplomacy. The image of 2 heads of state shaking hands across a table before cameras at the conclusion of negotiations became one of the most powerful visual symbols in modern politics. It did not merely signal agreement. It performed agreement publicly in a way that committed both parties in front of witnesses. When Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat shook hands on the White House lawn in 1993, the gesture did work that no document could quite do. It made visible in a single moment something that millions of people around the world could see and understand without any translation. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic briefly ended the handshake. For a period of roughly 2 years, the gesture that had survived 2,500 years of human history, wars, plagues, revolutions, the rise and fall of empires, was suspended by public health guidance. People bumped elbows, touched fists, nodded, waved, and something interesting happened. Many people did not miss it. The handshake, it turned out, had not been universal because it was the best possible greeting. It had become universal through history, commerce, and social convention, and it was entirely possible to greet someone without it. Some predicted the handshake would not return. It did return, more or less completely, more quickly than many expected. The social pull of a 2,500-year-old gesture turned out to be stronger than 2 years of public health guidance. But the pause revealed something. The handshake is not instinct. It is not biology. It is a learned behavior, a cultural technology, adopted because it solves specific problems, proving peaceful intent, sealing agreements, expressing equality, and retained because it continued to solve those problems well enough that the cost of changing felt higher than the cost of keeping it. The next time you extend your right hand to a stranger, you are performing a gesture that originated as a proof that you were not holding a sword. You are doing what Quaker merchants did in 17th century England to signal that they would deal honestly with you. You are doing what ancient Mesopotamian rulers did to seal covenants that would outlast them both. The gesture takes 3 seconds. It carries 2,500 years of accumulated meaning, most of which neither you nor the person you are greeting is consciously aware of, which is perhaps the most interesting thing about the invisible systems we have been examining in this series. They do not need to be understood to function. They only need to be performed. The meaning accumulates in the repetition, not in the explanation. You shake hands, you drive on a particular side of the road, you set your clock to a time decided by railroad companies 140 years ago, and none of it requires you to know why.